Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a super interesting conversation with Richard O'Connor. And Richard, you're the CEO of B2B Marketing. But I think what is really interesting about your background is you haven't just been around the go-to-market engine. You spent maybe 3/4 of your career deep into sales transformation. And for the last, 5 years or so, you've run a B2B marketing agency and you consult with your clients on a daily basis around that. And so you've not only seen both sides of the fence, but you've been deep in the muck, right, on both sides. And so what that does is I love you coined it, but in our conversations that just came through, you take on a commercial marketer perspective, right? And that's what every CEO and every B2B company, every CRO, CSO, the board, they don't want marketing just throwing more MQLs over the wall, right? They want a full funnel commercial marketer that thinks like a business person and is going to be able to impact the growth of the business. And there's a lot of ways that happens that we're going to talk about here today. But what I'd love to do is just, if you don't mind, just expanding a little bit more on that background before we get started.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me, Steve. I guess, look, people's CVs are not that interesting to other people, but just a potted history. I've been a salesperson. I started my career, cut my teeth selling recruitment advertising and classified advertising. I've sold SaaS, I've sold agency, creative work, and I've run sales teams and run commercial teams, go-to-market teams. So most of my career, as you quite rightly say, was more sort of oriented towards the sales side and the commercial side. And latterly, and I've always worked with marketers. I've always worked on the marketing side. I've run small marketing teams, but sales is definitely my experience. But in the last 5 years, as you quite rightly say, I fell into the role at B2B Marketing, a role which I absolutely love and have become deeply passionate about B2B marketers. And it's fascinating to see it from the other side of the fence, and we should talk about whether there should be a fence at all. But it's fascinating to see it from the other side. And, I think the whole kind of world order of how sales and marketing and growth works is just going through its own transformation right now. And it's just really interesting to have one foot in the sales side and see how that's evolving, but now in the marketing side and seeing how the importance of marketing and yet how much it's still undervalued is playing out, really.
And now you're the CEO of a company, so you're responsible for the bottom line.
Well, that's true.
Across all departments, right?
Oh, very true.
That's a whole third hat that you put on here. But, you just mentioned something there that I think is a great place to start out. Should there be a fence between sales and marketing? And you talk about how actually separate sales and marketing departments can really hold the companies back. And I just love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, if I think about, we run a trend tracker survey and have done for many, many years, and always in the top 3 challenges for B2B marketers is sales and marketing alignment. And when you've got that at the top of your challenges, something's off. Something just doesn't work. The fact that there is a problem with alignment in your 2 most important growth teams, it should be a red flag to CEOs and organizations. So are we saying that alignment is an ambition? I mean, that just seems odd. If you think about it, if you take a step back, our ambition is to get 2 businesses who should have common goals to actually align with each other. I mean, what a waste of effort. What a waste of time. But yet we've been doing it for 50, 60, 70 years. It's the way the business is constructed. It's the way CEOs organize the wider business. That's where the growth function is. It's sales and it's marketing. And increasingly, I think what's happened is that the language in marketing has become ever more esoteric. MarTech has been, a great gift to marketers, but in many ways it's made them even more isolated from the rest of the organization. You've got MQLs and SQLs, you've got the funnel, and we can talk about the funnel in a bit. You've got a whole different set of nomenclature and language that, frankly, anyone outside of marketing doesn't care about and doesn't really understand. And I think that's really, in many cases, not in every case, but in many cases, that's isolated marketing. And, if I cast my mind back 15 years, we were talking about the fact that sales don't trust marketing's leads, and you need an SLA between sales and marketing to make sure there's a common understanding of what makes a good lead. Sales trust their own leads. Wow. I mean, wow. And yet we've lived with this. We've lived with this misalignment and never really challenged the root cause. So the alignment is the symptom, and some of the behaviors and the lack of trust. And, when under pressure, different behaviors come to the surface. But I don't think anyone's ever looked adequately at the root cause. And the root cause is having sales and marketing as separate functions is never going to work.
I think this deserves even a little bit more conversation because, there's so many symptoms that come out of that, right? Every sales department has X% of leads that has to be sales generated anyways, right? And so sales is never 100% relying on marketing and leads. And in fact, we reject leads from marketing on a regular basis. We reject 60, 70% of the content that marketing gives us to help us close leads. 70% or so of thought leadership content that is supposed to develop trust and awareness out there, B2B leaders don't see any value in. From a CEO's position, you kind of look at some of these hard numbers and you think, what the hell am I doing? Right? Why have I put up with this so long? And what the picture that I got when you were talking there was that, I don't know if you remember, when we were kids and we used to do every once in a while, a 3-legged race, right? You tied a leg together and then you would have to run the race together. Not the beginning of the race, not just in the middle. Somebody else didn't untie and finish the race. You ran the entire race together. In order to win, you had to work all the way through. And I just think that's what came to mind when you were talking about, how do we do that? How do we not have separate numbers, separate goals? How do we have shared numbers? How do we actually run the race together?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And it doesn't mean, I don't think anyone's naive enough to think marketing can do sales job and sales do marketing's job. It doesn't mean that everyone's got slightly different objectives, but within a cross-functional team where the ultimate goal is the same thing. And I think that's where the challenge lies. All the time, you've got marketing incentivized and targeted and with objectives that are some form of MQL, some kind of product of the marketing effort that gets handed over to sales to then take on and do something with. I think that's where the problem is. If you're both aligned, and we have to try and walk the walk in our business. So I've just set our new financial year is April, and I've just set our objectives for product, sales, and marketing. And they are exactly the same. It is pipeline growth, closed won business, and pipeline velocity. And they're all three are targeted on the same thing. I am judging the heads of those departments on the same thing. Now, are they all going to do the same thing? No, they're going to have different roles, but they all know what the North Star is. They know what we're trying to achieve. And I think that in itself is actually sometimes beyond businesses. They just get into the habit of setting slightly different objectives, slightly different incentives. Inadvertently, it's not a willful thing, inadvertently push those teams slightly further apart. And actually, over time, what happens is they get further and further away from strategy, understanding the business strategy, understanding the growth goals, understanding where the business makes money, and making sure that the go-to-market teams fully understand that and remain aligned to that is really key. Because what happens, it yourself, Steve, in large organizations, over time and over the course of a year, you just gradually edge a little bit further away from the ultimate growth goal. So by the time you get to the end of the year, you might be, 20-30% away from actually what you're really supposed to be achieving. It's just the way corporates work. But I think it is the CEO's responsibility. It's not the sales and marketing alignment, I think, is a CEO problem, not a sales and marketing problem.
That's going to be a quote we take out of this podcast right there. I talked to another CEO. He'd been 17 years at Accenture, and he said, it's my number one job as the CEO is to make sure that the teams are properly aligned. Because if they're aligned, then we've hired the right people, hopefully, that know how to execute. I had another CMO on, and she said, it's amazing what the teams do. When there is a shared goal, there's a shared number, then let them be creative, right? Let them find how they do that together. But the shared number and that alignment that you're talking about, like that term shared number is now bantered around everywhere, right? At least it's coming up in the conversations a lot more. And I'm talking to C-suite leaders who have between marketing and sales shared numbers more than I ever have. And I've only been doing this podcast for like 3 years. So it is a trend that seems to be kind of going in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree. Just before we move on, have you heard, familiar with the phrase commander's intent? It was a Harvard Business Review article from a few years ago, and it's always stuck with me. And it was a metaphor around leadership, and it was a genuine story from the U.S. Army, where the U.S. Army used to try and literally plan for every possible scenario in a battle. So they try and plan for where people would land, where the troops would go, what the objectives were. And what they realized quite quickly is that, when you drop people out of planes and, things are happening on the ground, you can't plan for everything. So somebody parachutes down, they land in the wrong spot because the wind was going in the wrong direction. Somebody else engages the enemy in an area they didn't expect to. So you end up with disarray. So what the change was, rather than try and plan for everything, you basically say, this is the ultimate objective. This is the commander's intent. So this is what we're aiming for. And you gave the teams the freedom and autonomy to self-organize on the ground, regroup, find a different battalion, work with them, because everybody knew what the ultimate goal was. And that became, as I understand it, your listeners could, pillory me now for misquoting this, but my understanding is that has become a much more practical operating model for warfare now, which is self-organizing groups focused on one ultimate goal.
And that makes more sense because like the chaos in the battlefield you're talking about, you talked about, you didn't use this word, but the chaos in the funnel, right? Like that never really was a funnel, right? Like the way buyers buy, that we can actually plan that out, right? And have a game plan for every aspect of the funnel and what's going to happen, and they're going to progress in these stages and everything. Tell me a little bit about like how that applies to the B2B warfare, like the B2B landscape inside a funnel, or inside the buyer's journey, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, funnels are a really lovely way to report. That's why they're really helpful. That's why people like them, because it just shows a lovely linear journey. You start up here, you've got prospects at the top, and they follow this lovely linear binary route where they gradually become more interested in your product, and ultimately they become a customer. You can see why people got hooked on it. You can see why the waterfall was hugely attractive, because it put some structure to a process, a system that, was difficult to predict. But I do think actually years ago, it probably was a bit more predictable. Growth came from, you could do certain actions and buyers would behave not in a uniform fashion, but it probably was a bit more of a linear funnel. But think about it now and our own experience, if whichever research you believe, Ehrenberg-Bass is a good one. If let's say 95% of people are not in market, which is what Ehrenberg-Bass talk about, but even if it's 80%, even if it's 75% are not in market now, but they're downloading your content, they are looking at your brochure, they're requesting a call with the sales team, for all intents and purposes, they're behaving like they want to buy. But the reality is they're not. They're doing research for the next 9 months. They might be thinking about the next budget cycle, and they will come into your funnel and for all intents and purposes, they look like they're going to buy, but then they disappear again. And you think, what? Or they come into your pipeline and then they ghost you because they're not ready to buy. And buyers are just not working or behaving in a binary way. It is a completely unpredictable, non-linear, wiggly line. And I just think we have to accept that. And we have to accept that and stop trying to use internal reporting mechanisms to try and force feed what is not reality into the business, and then be disappointed with the results.
A couple of things that come out of that. First off is there was a gentleman, four-time B2B CRO, came on the podcast, and he's like, Steve, if we're not out and we're not talking to the buyer a year in advance of them like having an RFP, getting into an official, buying mode, we're done. We're sunk. There's no way that we can try to look for those buying signals that you're talking about, build the relationship, build trust, get on the day one list, be the one or maybe two that they're really focused on and are going to buy from anyways, right? So if you kind of work back from that, right, on day one, if like, I think it's Sixth Sense, they had a study that like between over 4 out of 5 buyers on average that go onto the day one list, 95% of the time, the company buys from that list. And there's really one that they have as a favorite going in, right? So on day one, if you're not the favorite going in, is really the writing on the wall there, then you've lost the deal. So if like, okay, if that's the reality, then you need to be doing a lot of work before the day one list, right? And so to me, that's where like ABM comes in, because we can't focus on building early relationships and investing in early relationships with everyone, like that 95% or 70% that's not in the market. But what we can do is say, hey, these are the companies that are going to establish the growth of our business. This is where our future, where we're banking it. This is where we can invest more heavily, right? And to me, that's a protection from this chaotic buyer's journey that you're talking about. Like, build the relationship.
Yeah, I agreed. And it does. It absolutely resonates. And I would go one before ABM, and that's brand. And salespeople, and having sat on the sales side of the fence, when people talk about brand, you can see the value of brand in consumer marketing, because you can see almost a direct link between, I go out there and I see a pair of Nike trainers. I like the look of those. I might go and buy them. The case for brand in B2B, I think from B2B salespeople, has been a little bit harder to make from the sales side. I can tell you that brand has never, ever been more important in B2B for exactly the reason you state. If you're going to be on the list, and the LinkedIn research that you cited, which I think is excellent, the hidden buyers are that what they care about is, do they understand the brand? Do they recognize the brand? They don't really care about its features. They don't care what it does, whether it serves a purpose. Do they recognize the brand? Do they trust that brand? And I think the investment in brand as I say, has never been more important, done well. And, we run a B2B Marketing Awards, and we see the highest quality work is more human, it's funny, it breaks the mold of, using cliche B2B language, and it cuts through. It really makes a massive difference. And to pull it back to the commercial marketer, you can make the commercial case for brand quite clearly. You just measure it on the output metrics, not just on the visibility and awareness and the kind of vanity metrics. And we see that more and more. Brand leads to growth.
And you know what? I still feel like I agree 100% with everything you're saying. The word brand has been, shoved to the side, trampled, misunderstood for so many years. Salespeople's eyes gloss over, boards glosses over, a CMO says it to their CEO or glosses over. We're not talking about, brand identity stuff. We're not talking about colors and palettes and positioning papers. And, we're talking about, if you go back to, like, if you ever took a marketing 101 class, brands were trust marks. And at the end of last year, Forrester came out with their big predictions for next year, and it was all about trust. It was about the currency to get into the deal, win the deal, keep the deal. And we all say we're in a relationship-based business, but do we really do the work, not just with the deals that are in the pipeline that we call late stages, right? That we put into our CRM as an 80% chance of close, right? But the investment in the relationship that is needed to even get into the running, get on that short list. And I just think that's a gap in the marketplace.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think you think of most organizations, even small businesses, but mid-market enterprise, you're in an annual 12-month budget cycle, and brand is long-term demand. So brand might not deliver for 2 years, and it might not deliver in that initial budget cycle, but we're in this corporate habit. And again, it's one of these behaviors that we've just got to try and break, is that it has to deliver within 12 months. You know what it's like, exactly what it's like in big corporates. It's, we've got this initiative, it's a transformation initiative. But what we wanted to do, we want to get results inside this financial year, because we're sort of slaves to the annual budget cycle. And it takes brand, and this is where the tension sometimes between sales and marketing comes from, is CEOs often overweight the last mile of the sale. So the closing of the deal ignores the fact that's probably come from if it's a piece of new business, it's probably come from a piece of brand work that was 2 years old, and a whole nurture campaign that has brought that brand, who was probably out of market then, has brought that prospect closer and closer, increased trust, as you quite rightly say, because I think trust in B2B has never been more important. In fact, one of our co-founders, Joel Harrison, has a whole podcast on trust in B2B, but it's never been more important. But you've brought that customer in, and sales have done a brilliant job of closing it. I'm not taking away anything from sales, but they weren't the only ones who worked on that. And I think that trust and that understanding of long-term work that's gone into it, which is more often than not from marketing, is really important.
You brought up another gap in our previous conversation that I think just directly relates to brand and building trust. And you called it the customer proximity gap, right? In that, businesses drift away from customer understanding and customer focus because we're so busy on the commercial aspects of the motion, right? Of going through our go-to-market. I mean, we can be completely consumed by that. But tell me a little bit about, like, how do you characterize the customer proximity gap and its relevance to what we're talking about?
Well, again, there's so much that's good about marketing, so much that's good in B2B. It's full of acronyms. It's full of, as I said before, esoteric language and approaches, and they're all valid. I think busy marketing teams who are doing more with less, who are expected to deliver outsized returns on a shrinking budget with fewer people, more AI tools, I think have less time to talk to real customers and see customers often as personas or ICP or through arm's length customer insight, which is helpful, and customer archetypes and all of it, but they're abstract concepts of customers. And they're probably 70% accurate, but nothing replaces talking to real customers. And I think, marketing often loses its power, loses its credibility at senior levels, because it's not directly talking to customers. Marketers, if you're a marketer listening, when was the last time you went and spoke to a customer? And another question, when was the last time you went and spoke to a customer not on a sales ride-along, where you're the sort of secondary person on that call? I mean, sales ride-alongs are good, that's good, but when did you actually go and speak to a customer for a non-sales conversation, just to understand how they tick, what their needs are? And I think that has gone by the wayside a little bit because of the busyness. No one's fault, lots of plates to spin, and we're serving these abstract people called customers. But surely, if you stand back for a second, which is what I'm trying to get us to do, is stand back for a second. Surely, if winning customers and bringing in new customers and retaining your existing customers and growing them, cross-selling and upselling, is vital to growth, surely you put more effort into actually speaking to them.
That's going to be another clip because that's very, very profound. And, it's one thing that I wanted to ask you about, because you talked about how AI is looked upon as like creating all kinds of efficiencies and allowing us to work smarter with smaller teams and things like that. But you said one of the things that you thought was overlooked is the fact that AI can help us listen to customers. And I kind of thought about it after you said that, and we got off our call. There's such a problem in the marketplace in that I call insight decay. And it's not only listening to all the places where we talk to customers, whether it's inside of a sales conversation, in a customer advisory board, in a non-sale conversation that the CMO has with 10 different customers over the last 2 months, right? All of those conversations happen with different people in different places, and then they make it into maybe a point or two in a team meeting that came out afterwards, a bullet point in a deck, a note in a CRM. But the longer time goes on, they just kind of fall apart, they decay. And it's not a collective knowledge base. This proximity to the customer has to be something that is then internalized by the teams. It has to be something that that proximity is felt by the teams that are actually delivering. And AI seems to have the best way to do that, right? Because it can take all of that and bring it together in a picture. And so that was what I took away from our last conversation. What am I leaving out of that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And it might sound like it's slightly at odds with what I've just said. It's not. I think marketers, salespeople need to spend as much time with customers and truly understanding them. The reality is customers can't always talk to you. So there's some pragmatic difficulties. They don't necessarily want to sit down every week and have a discovery call and just sharing objectives. Although oddly enough, our customers do. They love a bit of time together to share challenges. But where was I going? I think the wonderful opportunity with AI isn't just about this time efficiency and making tasks easier. That's brilliant. It's helpful. And we should talk about what you do with that time that you save. But I do think it is a brilliant way of capturing and spotting patterns that are invisible to the naked eye. That's what AI is brilliant for. So a really good example, we capture customer conversations like you would in Gong or Salesforce. Customer conversations, it does summaries of customer conversations, and it just helps us understand how we can deliver our services better. But actually what you can draw, it can do that at scale. And what you can draw from that and add intent signals, you can add other bits of behavior, conversations we're having, the questions that are asked at our events, the discussions that are happening in our community. What AI can do is bring all of those together and really uncover some of the kind of hidden insights that even if you do have lots of conversations with customers, you just the brain can't process it. And so it enables you to obtain insight, hidden gems at a greater scale. And I think actually that's probably the biggest opportunity with AI that I feel it should be one of the biggest use cases. And I'm sure it is for many organizations.
And the good news is AI doesn't forget it, right? So like the next time a new team member comes in, right? Like that happens all the time, right? We're constantly bringing new team members in. Like AI is that like this great internal learning program too, because it retains the knowledge of the customer and what was important and can be referenced and can be inserted into demand gen campaigns and all kinds of good stuff. I always get to the end and I was like, oh God, I wish we had another couple hours because I really do. But if there was like one thing that you wanted the audience to take away from our conversation, if they remembered nothing else, what would that one thing be?
I honestly think where we are now, the old rules are breaking down, and we didn't get onto the world economy, and we probably shouldn't. But there's a kind of a new world order, which is breaking from the kind of rules of the past, and I think will trickle down to the way go-to-market teams work. And I think we should actively be looking at disruptive approaches to the way we think about growth. What Uber did to taxis, what Airbnb did to going on holiday, what Spotify did to music. I think now is an opportunity for us to disrupt the way we think about the way we're structuring growth teams. And I think it's an opportunity to reinvent. And the past is irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant. It's a helpful reference point. You can't change anything about it. All that matters and all you can control is what's ahead of you. And I think we should all be a little bit braver in upending some of the conventional wisdom of how we approach growth.
I love what we've talked about here. The whole mission of this podcast is for us as C-suite executives to come with our very varied backgrounds and different perspectives and, war scars and all the years that we've been in the business and just share, right? And share where we think rethinking, how are we applying and what new insights and ways of going to market that we need to be adopting and acting on. And I call that the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of the rising tide today. I just want to say thank you, Richard, for coming.
Well, no, thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and yeah, it was nice. Thanks for the opportunity to chat to your audience.